Hi everyone. Good evening everyone. Добрий вечір усім. Мене звати Анна Романдаш, я ваша модераторка та співорганізаторка MediaBoost 2.0. Я зроблю коротесеньке оголошення українською мовою для всіх тих, хто хоче почути переклад, а потім перейду на англійську. Отже, на початку нагадую, що MediaBoost 2.0 – це проект, який організовує Digital Communication Network разом із America House Kyiv за підтримки Посольства США в Україні. Це 20 вебінарів для журналістів, медійників та всіх причетних про все, що стосується журналістики в цифрову епоху. Наш вебінар відбувається в Zoom, і він буде англійською мовою. Якщо ви хочете слухати цей вебінар англійською мовою в оригіналі, ми будемо стрімити англомовну версію на Facebook, на YouTube і також, власне, є можливість дивитися в Zoom. Якщо ж ви хочете слухати переклад українською наживо, тоді, будь ласка, заходьте до нас в Zoom-кімнату. Як це зробити? Йдіть до нас на сайт mediaboost.live, реєструйтеся і приходьте в Zoom. Отже, зараз буду переходити на англійську мову. Також для тих, хто хоче слухати переклад в Zoom, власне, українською мовою, клацайте на глобусик з перекладом і обирайте португальську мову. Португальська мова – це українська мова. All right, everybody. Hi, good evening. Thanks all for joining us. My name is Anna Ramandash. I'm your moderator, and I'm one of the organizers of the MediaBoost 2.0 project. I'm very happy to have you all here for our 16th already webinar in the framework of MediaBoost. Today we have Chарльz Meyns, who we actually already met Chарльz on Monday, and we will be talking today about podcasts as well, but today we will be talking more about webinars and more about technical stuff with the podcast. Sorry about that. I just a lot going on in my head. So today we'll be talking about editing, creating a podcast, using a lot of different tools, free tools, paid tools. I don't know. Chарльz will tell you better. And we will also have floor for you guys to ask us questions. So as I told you, you can listen to this podcast in Ukrainian, you can listen to this podcast in English, just click translation if you want to listen to it in Ukrainian. A quick reminder, MediaBoost 2.0, it's 20 webinars. As I said, we are already on our webinar number 16. So we have 4 more to go. Next week, we'll actually have 2 webinars on podcasts with a Ukrainian expert, with Кирило Безкоровайний from Kunst. So I also encourage you to register to come. You can find all of the information about MediaBoost on our website, mediaboost.live. There you will find resources, you will find videos from our previous webinars, and you will also find the schedule for our new webinars. You can register on this website and you will be getting our newsletters with all of the reminders, all of the goodies, all of the important stuff that you need to know about this webinar. I also get a lot of questions. Do we record those webinars? Can we get the recording? Yes, you can. We are recording the webinars. All of the recordings are, again, on the website, mediaboost.live. So without further ado, I give the floor to Chарльz.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for having me back, folks. It's good to be here again. I wish I spoke Ukrainian. I speak Russian. I'm here in Moscow in my living room. Like most of you, I'm at home because of all the quarantines and all the various things happening with the virus. I wish we were doing this in person. It would be easier, but we're going to try and get through some of these technical hurdles. We were talking before, we were just getting started, and we realized that unfortunately some of playing some sessions of these audio workstations that we'll talk about today, unfortunately they don't play through Zoom, which is going to be a challenge, but I think we can still illustrate some of the principles. And this is really what today is about. It's not so much about mastering techniques, but kind of introducing to concepts. I think you'll find that there's no quote like one way to do stuff. As Anna noted, we're going to talk a little about licensed software and tricks and tools that are available, things that cost money, but also ways you can get around that, and some free solutions that are available online that all can let you at least play with some of the ideas you have for getting into podcasting or making recordings or trying to sketch out some of your ideas to launch a podcast at some point. So today we're going to talk about more of the tech aspect. In Monday's session, For those of you who joined, we talked a little bit about different ways that different groups are using podcasting these days, whether it's in the media, people who traditionally didn't work with, say, radio or do radio, weren't working at radio stations, but were working at print newspapers or web outlets, or magazines are now suddenly doing podcasts. Also, people in think tanks and NGOs can, address certain issues that are of vital importance to them and promote them. We've seen how brands are using podcasts. And we looked at some of the examples of that, and just how general people, because it's it's a fairly cheap and easily available way to launch and discuss your ideas. And so hopefully we'll talk about some of the technical aspects today of how that'll happen. And I welcome your questions. I think, as far as I know, Anna's going to be kind of filtering them she has full license to interrupt me at any moment. So Anna, please use that power when you want to. So let's get started. I just want to start off by talking and see if I can get this moving. Is this going to work? And I think we'll find out soon. No, it went to the very beginning. That's not what I was supposed to do. Okay, so give me 1 second. I believe we went from here. There we go. Okay, so let me get this playing. Cool. So again, we're going to talk sort of more of the technical aspects today. And, the first point to make is that, technology, it's changing all the time. There are always new tools coming out, but a lot of the ideas are really similar. I mean, we're still talking about some basic processes that were relevant, whether you had digital technology or not. And, and they're pretty obvious ones, frankly. So, it would be in our case, we're trying to record something, we're trying to mix it, we're trying to distribute it, and we're trying to get people to listen. And so we know that, in the recording industry for bands and musicians that we liked, whether it was jazz in the 1920s or today, people had studios. People were trying to make arrangements with the different sounds that they had. They would try and get someone to put them out and get people to listen. And so it's the same kind of idea with podcasting. We're trying to essentially using some of the tools that are available to us now. And the good news is that they're fairly cheap. Some of them are free. And so we'll look at some of these aspects. First, to get with recording, I want to say that there are a lot of options available. You can be a purist about this and talk about having the greatest sound in the world. And that's nice if you have that option, but you certainly don't have to do that. And so I want to start by looking at that. And pointing out to some of these portable recorders that are available. You've probably seen them with reporters out in the field, even people just taking notes from conferences or trying to keep track of, make their own personal recordings if they're field hobbyists. So this is an example where there are a lot of different brands out there. Zoom is one that's very popular. In fact, that's the one I have here. I don't know if you can see this, if we can switch screens for a second, but this is the Zoom H2N model, very small. So as you can see, it's about the size of my hand. It records very nice sounds, has a lot of different flexible ways of doing it. You can set the microphone to record going forward, going both ways, going surround sound, so 4 channels. And there are plenty of examples of this. Here's another one is Tascam. And this one, it has what they call XLR outs. So you plug essentially in, see if I've got a little bunch of toys next to me. But you essentially plug in a cable, like a mic cable, and then you would attach it to, a microphone. In this case, this is what they call pushka, or like a shotgun microphone. So we have all these different recorders that are available. A lot of them are what they call all-in-one, so you don't need, for example, an external microphone, such as this Zoom model I talked about, the one that's in the picture there. But they're not all the same. I mean, if you're looking to purchase one, and the Zooms tend to be quite affordable. Sony's are a little more expensive. Tascam's a little more expensive as well. Roland's another brand. But if you look at them, you might want to pay attention to reviews on battery life. How many batteries does it take? How long does it last? Reviews on ease of use. How easy do people find using them in the field? Whether it has capabilities to connect with microphones or external microphones, and some of the other features that are there. So, for example, one thing I find very convenient about using the Zoom, and I'm not employed by Zoom. This is not a commercial for Zoom, but it's really that with 2 AA batteries in the back, standard AA Polichki, I think they called in Russian. I don't know about Ukrainian. So with 2 AA batteries, you can record for something like 30 hours, and the SD cards inside are, like the 30 gigabytes now. So you can record a lot of material. And so when I'm going on a trip for reporting, I'm a journalist as well as a podcaster. If I'm going somewhere, like I took a trip to the far north of Russia, and I was doing a story about this Shias group of protesters who were protesting the building of a giant landfill in their area, and you had to march deep into the forest, and it was we're camping out for 3 days to talk to people. And I was so happy to use the Zoom because it was small, it was light, I didn't have to worry about batteries running out, and it was just something I could put in my pocket and take it out when I needed to. So that's something just to keep in mind as one solution. You see people in their own, it's a good solution for someone who's looking to go interview people, or perhaps if you wanted to do, it's an affordable way to do, say, a round table discussion where you could put it on surround sound. So it's recording from every angle, 360 degrees, 360 degrees. And say you crowd around a small coffee table and have a discussion, and the recording should sound fairly decent. So it might be one way to look at doing recordings. As I mentioned, there are other microphones. The pushka, the shotgun I mentioned, is, you see this constantly with people, who work in the television field, for example. Lavalier, I've got the Russian here, petlichka, is it's the clip-on mic you're kind of familiar with from videos and television stations. There's something called omnidirectional mics. There are stereo mics. There's something called binaural, which is when you have microphones that actually record as if you hear. So they're basically like having headphones, but with microphones embedded in them. And then you have you might call your studio microphones. We've seen that in, constantly, like it's kind of like what you imagine when a radio DJ or radio host is behind the microphone. It's got they call it cardioid mic. These days, when you're talking about sort of a home studio, usually these cardioid mics are going through an audio interface. This is an example of one where, it's a little, what they call желез, hardware. There are many different brands. You're plugging the microphone into that, and then the box goes into your computer and allows you to regulate things a little bit better. But again, these are just extras that might be of use to people who are trying to kind of plan out how to build a studio. And there are other elements here we could talk about. For example, mixers. That's the classic mixing board where you have, 4, 8, or 16 channels. So those things but I think it's more important to, I guess I would stress, and certainly, although I have gear that I use, I find, ease of use is the most important thing for me. I don't necessarily buy the most expensive stuff. So again, the Zoom is, I think, I don't know, it costs about $120, maybe $140. And you'll see, I want to show you an example of how people can use, other affordable things. So we also have, of course, smartphones today, which everybody seems to have. And, it's an example where there are a lot of mobile recording apps that allow you maybe not to get quite as good a recording as you would with, say, a professional microphone or even the Zoom recorder. But you can get a pretty decent recording. You have to worry about other things, unfortunately. It might be you have to worry about, for example, batteries, your battery running out on your phone if it's an important interview. But there are a couple examples here where, certainly recording apps on an iPhone, for example, the voice memo, even the simple voice memo can be a really good way to capture sounds in a pinch. And I certainly do. From time to time. So, and then some of these other ones are just a few other examples, but, there's something you can, if you're interested, go and do a little research on them. But essentially the point is that they're allowing you to use your phone to record sounds. I think this iRig recorder, for example, let's see if I have this here. Did I grab it? Yeah. So that's an example where, in fact, they're finding ways to kind of hybrid the two. Where it has this XLR cable to allow you to plug in a professional microphone, but then it goes into your iPhone jack, and so it interfaces with your iPhone to create sort of a kind of professional recorder. So there's some ways, again, that can be very helpful. I do find that, probably like most of you, my phone is constantly low on batteries. So the idea of really relying on it to make an important recording wouldn't be my first choice, but it's a way to operate when you need to. I want to talk a little bit about audio files. Sometimes people get very confused by this. There's certainly many different ones, but the standard one we use for a lot of recordings for podcasts and for radio are what they call WAV files. So this .wav. You see that there are different settings. You can record in 16-bit, 24-bit, 48-bit, et cetera, et cetera. 16 and 24 is probably about as high as you need to go. In fact, most people in radio, which again, the quality tends to broadcast higher than with podcasts, 16-bit is usually just fine. They have sample rates that can get confusing for people. When you're seeing, like, as you're turning on your recorder, you might see this whole different menu of different ways to record. A 44.1 is the one that's standard for audio. 48 is pretty standard if you're doing audio with video. And that's really about sample rates to sync up between images and sound. And most important, just as we go further down, it's something where you really need to pay attention as you're creating an audio session, but it's something we'll talk about a little further down as we get into the talk today. There are other audio files that can be confusing to people. Like I've got a few listed here, like OGG, this MP2, there's AIFF, there's lossless Apple quality. All these things are, again, you'll find occasionally that sometimes they don't work with, sometimes applications don't play friendly with formats of audio, just like we see sometimes with video. It's kind of a black art. But there are usually ways to get around that. It's not the end of the world. MP3, of course, we all know, but maybe we don't pay as much attention to the fact that there are different settings within the MP3. So there's kind of a higher quality and lower quality. If you need to record in MP3 format, which some people do if they're kind of low on space on an SD card or something like that, the higher you go, the better. You're just the general rule, frankly, is to record as high quality as possible. And then there's also this issue of stereo versus mono. It doesn't really matter in the end, because we're actually pulling in our audio to make kind of into what we call audio sessions, digital workstations. We're actually creating essentially we're creating like a collage of different sounds. So whether it's stereo or mono isn't essential. We can create that effect with mono even. But anyway, I would say, it's not something to worry about so much. Just most important thing, which we'll get to, is that when you record, you want to wear headphones, like this young woman is here in this picture. I just want to show, this is an example where a lot of people who work as independent radio producers in the US, for example, they may have software and nice recorders, but they're usually recording their own voice in some creative spaces. So a lot of people, for example, if they live in New York City and it's really loud, the quietest space they can find is to get a flashlight, put a blanket over their head and crawl into bed and read their text, so their narration for their stories. So again, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. We see these very sort of glorious, music recording studios, and you may think you need that, but you can, and it's a nice thing to have, but I don't think it's necessary. As we're using microphones, I like to describe it when you're recording sounds and trying to capture sounds. I like to think of it like a lot of people are very visual in the way they think about things. So they understand the concept of photography or videography, where, we might have a close-up, we might have like a mid shot, and a wide shot, a shot from far away. And in some ways, when you're recording audio, if I'm out in the field, trying to capture an event and trying to capture the elements that I can use later when I'm mixing, I try and use that same approach. Some things, if I'm doing an interview, I want to be close. I want to have, the microphone might be, maybe 3-4 inches away from the person's face. If I'm trying to capture kind of action, it's sort of a mid shot, so let's say it's it might be, as a reporter, for example, we go to demonstrations or rallies or protests, and so you might want to get some people chanting. But I also want to try and get that kind of wide shot. So it might be trying to get that sense of what the atmosphere was at the place. So it might be sirens from police and the crowds chanting and the general sort of scramble of what's happening there. And all these elements gives me things I can play with that I can use when I'm putting together a story. And it's the same approach for podcasts. So again, this idea of sound in some ways, of course, we're using our ears, but sometimes it's helpful to think of it visually. I'm trying to get, again, that from close up, when it's an interview, if it's an action or something's happening, and then the general atmosphere, what they call natural sound. But it's important when you do so, and this is really, really, I want to emphasize this, headphones really, really help you. They're your eyes. So if we're thinking about this visually, headphones allow you to understand what you're actually capturing. Otherwise, you're really, really blind. You're really, or deaf, frankly. So what it does is it allows you not only to understand what you're capturing, but also find out if there's some really, really bad problem, like maybe the mic cord isn't connected, or maybe you have it on pause as you think you're recording a really important interview. So it's a really essential thing. If you have the opportunity, I would recommend getting what they call closed ear headphones. These are ones that go over your ear, because they allow you to really isolate sound and understand what's happening. Earbuds, like what I'm wearing right now as I talk to you, are okay for music, but not as helpful when you're trying to understand capturing sounds. And as we talk about capturing sounds, I think one of the biggest problems that people have, frankly, is just dumb mistakes. It's not, it happens to anybody. It happened, actually, we did an interview the other day and some of these problems arose. So I just want to list them. And, the idea is that you maybe you can't prevent them all the time, but you can do your best to kind of avoid problems. And so the first thing you can do is wear headphones. At least lets you know the problem's occurring, and you can start to address it before you make a really important recording, or I should say ruin a really important recording. But some of the problems we see commonly, so if you're out in the street and you want to record somebody, the wind noise, it's when wind kind of knocks through a microphone. We've all heard it on bad recordings for radio, and maybe as you made like home videos or something. It just dominates the microphone, and the audio device can't recognize the sound. So what we have are these windscreens. They always look like little kind of fuzzy bear toys. So that might be something, if I was going out and recording in the field, I would put something like this on, and they're usually they have foam ones that are a bit light, but it's usually these ones that are furry that are a little bit more windproof. Another thing, again, if you are wearing headphones, you can hear this. If you're not, you won't know. And it's particularly important with these portable devices. It's called handling noise. So if I was kind of fidgeting with this as I'm talking to someone, that can pick up in the microphone. It ruins the recording. So what I'm trying to do is get comfortable holding the device, and then keep it really still, and place the microphone where I need it to be. But again, if I'm monitoring the sound as I'm listening on headphones, I know when I'm messing up, and that's really helpful. Crackling cables is another one. So that's when, it might be just a bad connection as the device is going into your recorder. Really common thing. Sometimes it's because of a bad cable. Sometimes it's because the connection's weird. Sometimes because it's wet outside. It's just a problem that you should, and again, if you know about it, then you can stop and try and address it before it ruins your recording, because you can't fix it. Another one that's really, really common is this mobile phone. We've heard it also, and I think in interviews where people do it, and there's something about the frequencies that enters into the recording phase and can ruin a really nice recording. So best if you're sitting down to do an important recording to you, ask people to turn off their phone, turn your own phone off, and that can really, really save you a lot of time. Another final note I want to mention is background noise. When I'm going to interview someone, I usually kind of do a look around, and again, it's helpful if you have headphones on, because you realize that that computer fan is really, really loud, or there's a clock that's ticking and you're really close to it, and it's going to kind of mess up your recording, or there's fans or windows are open. or maybe background music's playing. All these things really make it challenging to edit later as we're trying to pick out the portions of our interview that we want to kind of edit and mix down for our podcast or our radio program or whatever we happen to be making. And then the final one, which is actually the most common, it doesn't have to be a mistake, but sometimes it's really helpful to keep in mind that if you talk over people, unless you have kind of a back and forth kind of talk show, sometimes it's nice to let people make their point, pause, and then ask a question, because you can find that sometimes recordings are ruined by the fact that you're just too quick because you get excited, or they're making a good point and you go yes, yes, yes. Those kind of interjections are really unhelpful for audio. They may seem natural when you're talking to someone, but actually when you're listening back, it's quite distracting. So that's something to keep in mind.
Charles, the audience is asking, maybe you can show the iRig and maybe some of the other tools again. But what I suggest, maybe stop your presentation for a second so we see your full screen, maybe also for the people who are watching us live, if you can do that.
Yeah, let me see. So if I do that and
stop sharing the screen and just show all of the amazing audio tools that we have. So
now you all can see me. Hi. Okay. So I see what you're saying. Okay. So hi everybody. So here's one. So this is this Zoom recorder that I was showing. And it's very small. It's about the size of my hand, as I said. It doesn't have a way for me, for example, to connect a microphone to here. It's got microphones inside it. And so this is one I like if I'm just working in the field. So when I went on this trip up north, I just took this thing to stop the wind, and headphones. You can plug headphones into it. And that's really all I needed to make a full report, which is kind of remarkable if you think about it. If you talk about some of these programs, this iRig is a simple device. They sell it at a lot of computer stores now, but it's, I'll see if I can hold this up. It's called the iRig. Maybe do like that. And it's, again, what it has is this, if you can see this XLR cable. So it allows you to plug it into, they have ones for the new iPhones, what is it called? Thunder, whatever that connector is. That's really irritating to everybody. And then you have also the old ones, which have the RCA cable, the standard jack for headphones. And so what it allows you to do is use your iPhone and interface it with a professional microphone. In this case, for example, I could record, put this to a microphone and combine these two together and then actually plug that into my iPhone. And as I was saying, I think it's the quality is really good. The only problem is that as you probably have all noticed in your own lives, we're constantly out of batteries with our smartphones. So if I was doing something where it was really important, I don't know if I would trust that to be my main source of interviewing people. But then there are all these different programs that are available now, and I think I listed off a couple of them. But obviously, even just the memo on your, say, iPhone, I'm sure Android has something similar, allows you to make quick recordings on the spot that can be very useful. And I've done that many times. Did I show anything? I think I also showed, some of the hardware. There's sometimes when you have a kind of a home studio setup, people will have, like that kind of a cardioid mic, what you think of as being that kind of radio style mic. But it doesn't have to be. And that goes through sometimes some hardware like this. This is from DigiDesign, but it's just one example, and there are many. And that just allows you to control the levels a little bit as you then put it into your computer. And so it's just one way it's called an audio interface. So you're interfacing between the microphone and the computer and then running it onto software. So those are just some examples. Did I show anything else? I think I was also talking about these over-the-ear headphones, which are just really helpful if you're trying to capture sounds, because sometimes little, earbuds like this, if it's noisy out, you really can't hear well enough, and you won't be able to tell if there are mistakes being made. So those are kind of the key points I would make here. Is there anything else I showed? I don't think so. should we go back to then the presentation? I think I just have to share.
Sure. We also have a few questions.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Do you want to take the questions now?
Absolutely.
All right. So the first question is, not sure if we're going to talk about it later, but people are already asking, how do I record during the pandemic when I don't see my, the interviewee? I just interview this person over Zoom or Skype or.
Yeah, it's a good question. I did want to talk about that a little later, but we can go to it right now. There are a lot of different ways to do it. People, for example, some really easy ones that people have used are, again, using Skype and Zoom. Zoom has a really nice feature where it allows you to choose a split channel, so you can record your voice and then the person you're talking to's voice separately, which is really, really convenient, because later when you're trying to sort out, sometimes, for example, you might be recording them and the dog runs into the room and starts barking or something, and it ruins, if those sounds are all in one file, it's very hard you can't separate them. But what's nice is Zoom allows you from the very beginning to record the session and get a clean recording of your interviewee and yourself if you like. So I use Zoom sometimes. There are also tools, Skype in the newer versions has a way to record your Skype sessions, so you can record audio. There are plugins such as Call Recorder is one that I use. And by the way, I want to point out that when Anna and I were talking about, I think we're going to give a list of some of these links later, because it's a lot of different ideas I'll be throwing at you.
That'd be perfect. I think people will love that.
Yeah, and so Call Recorder, I believe, it may cost $40, $25, something like that, but it's a lifetime, guarantee, I guess. And so you can, and I use that sometimes. There are also challenges sometimes strangely enough, it's sometimes very hard, as just as we saw with this Zoom session, as we were trying to get ready, for some reason we can't play from our digital audio workstations that we wanted to show. It won't allow the audio to play through the Zoom session. And so you have these kind of weird things you run into when you're working with computers. But another tool that I use is something called Wiretap. It's a little program that allows you to record all the sounds that are coming through your computer. So if sometimes there's a problem getting the input signal to record, it's just a backup tool that I use. So that might be, for example, useful if when as a radio journalist and as someone who works on podcasts, sometimes you don't know what platforms people will be willing to talk with you on. It's nice if they have, if they're friends of yours and they're willing to take the time and effort to download Skype, for example. People seem to hate Skype, and I agree with them. People get really frustrated and they're just like, no, I don't want to talk to you on Skype, because they don't want it. So, but they may be, for example, have a Facebook account. And so you can't record audio on Facebook, but I can use this Wiretap program to record a conversation with somebody on Facebook. And so, or Telegram is another example. That's very popular now with people who are interested in, of course, security. And so I'll talk to people, for example, from the Russian opposition on Telegram, and I'll use this Wiretap program to record them. And that's, and frankly, since the pandemic began in, what was it, April, March, when things started to shut down, 99% of the work I do is probably using those tools. And that's stuff that I'm doing for broadcast or for podcast. And again, it's not perfect. I mean, does it sound as good as when you sit with somebody in a room and have a nice microphone or a Zoom recorder like this? No, but it's passable. Other options people have tried to work out, which is tricky. You can sometimes coach people to record themselves on their iPhone and ask them to turn on the recording. It's not a bad choice, but the problem is you have to then coach them for getting the audio off the iPhone onto the internet to send it to you and make sure that no mistakes are made. So it's hard to, it might be a nice way to have a possibility for a backup. Might be something to explore. But I've read countless examples of people saying, oh, I finally found a really simple way for someone to record themselves on an iPhone while you interview them. And it seems really hard to me. I don't know. You don't have any control. There's just no way to control what's happening. So, they can do a great job or they could really screw it up and you're out of luck. So anyway, so all those are examples of some of the tools. I'm trying to think if I left anyone out. The other one, and this is more from a reporter's point of view, I think, than a podcaster's, but, we see how everybody has these, with WhatsApp, obviously another popular messaging platform, it has the recording possibility. So for people who don't have Skype, hate Facebook, won't download Telegram, another example where they might have WhatsApp, and I say, okay, well, I'll ask a question, record the audio, send them audio, ask a question, and then they respond back, and you can download those tracks. It's a little stilted. It doesn't feel like a real conversation, but it's a solution if you are really, needed one. So those are just some examples. Do you want another question on it, or should we move on? What's best?
Yeah, there is one. Let's have a short answer for this one. Why would you prefer WAV and not MP3?
It's a question of quality. The quality of WAV or WAV files is higher. So if you're listening on nice quality gear or nice headphones, you can tell a difference. I have to say that MP3s do sound impressive, but what MP3s are doing is they're taking a lot of the sound, they're removing parts that they think that the human ear can't hear. And so, it's probably acceptable for when you see like the 320 bit MP3s, so the higher quality MP3s. Sometimes you'll see they won't even give you the numbers. They'll just say highest quality, medium quality, low quality. And that of course makes a difference in terms of the file size. So waves are much bigger file sizes, and therefore they capture a lot more information. And so if it's a voice, for example, it has a richer sound to it. But again, if I was, in a pinch, knew that I only had, for example, on these recorders, you turn them on, you say, oh, I only have, an hour's left of time, and I need more than that, then I might switch from WAV to MP3 to capture more material. And then, before I clean off this chip inside the SD card and makes more space. But generally speaking, it's not that MP3 is not criminally bad, it's just not ideal. And so if you have, a professional recorder, like a Zoom or something, then it's best to record at the highest quality and then bump it down if you need to later.
Sounds good. Thanks. I think we can move on with the presentation.
Okay. Where do we? Oh yeah. So this was just getting to a point that people seem to make a lot of mistakes, and you can avoid them by just being smart. People. I still have Russian friends who are podcasters who come up to me and they say, "Oh, can you listen to this terrible recording we made, and how can we fix it?" And they always think there's some magical way to do it. And you can sometimes figure ways to solve problems, but the easiest thing you can do is just not make those mistakes. And again, how do you do that? You wear headphones. You find a quiet place to record where there's no music in the background. You have headphones on, so you can find the place where the voice sounds richest, and it's the best place. Kind of what they call mic placement. You cannot talk over your subject by constantly saying, "Oh yeah." So all these things are just really will help as you go forward. And I know they sound obvious, but you'd be amazed how often people make mistakes. So let me see if I can do this. Can I do this? Let's say I go back to this. We're going to skip. Okay, cool.
If you're sharing your screen, that you're not doing it yet. You have.
Yeah, I forgot. We took it off. I forgot. 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. That's a really good point. And this should do it again. Yeah.
Yep. Perfect.
Oh, cool. All right, we're back. Okay. So another thing. The mistake that happens a lot, and again, you're listening on headphones can help, but you also have a visual way to look at this. Often it's the sound levels. So the difference between digital recording and analog recording. So analog, and by that I mean recording to like old tape, or if you see in the studios, we have that thick tape that would be on I think they're called babinki in Russian, but these tape reels. If you go over the zero gain line, in analog, it can sound kind of nice sometimes. It gives kind of a warm quality. In digital, it sounds terrible. So it gets crunchy. It's really unpleasant to listen to. So when you're looking, basically, what they call is decibels. That's dB here. You're trying to get the recording between -12 to -3 decibels. And what that means is really when you're looking at that, if you see it hitting red, you want to turn down your audio recording level or get a little further away from your source. Some people get really just talk loud, and you have to kind of adjust to what you're seeing and what you're hearing. But that's something also just to pay attention to, because you can, if a recording is too quiet, you can bump it up. It's not ideal, but you can, if something records at -20 dB and you listen to it and you think, oh, this is really, really quiet, there are tools to bump up the sound. If it's too loud and you're already in the red and it's this crunchy sound that's really unpleasant, there's no way to fix it. And so, you're really just out of luck. So always skew quiet rather than loud. But the ideal zone would be -12, around that part, -6. And just so I'm clear about that, well, actually, no, I'll explain it later. I'll move on. This is kind of repeating a little bit of what I said before, but just to emphasize it again, other things that are really helpful, probably in order of importance here, I think, would be, headphones are really, you really need them. Windscreens, if you're really going to be recording outside, a good quality windscreen, that fuzzy thing I was showing you before, is really important. Extra batteries. I mean, it's another mistake people make a lot, is they go out and they turn on their recorder and they realize that, oh, there's only about 10% left on the batteries. And, again, they need to run and find a new one. All these, these recorders work on SD cards and media. So, you want to make sure that you've got free space there. This pistol grip is what I was referring to. It's kind of like, it's what gives this microphone, makes it look like a gun. When I'm holding that kind of long, big microphone, it's just a handle that allows you to avoid what they call handling noise, that kind of constant sense that someone's kind of like moving around with their hands and gripping the microphone. Those are the main ones, and we'll move on to other points later. So keep moving there. Again, I was saying, I think before that you can try and avoid mistakes. They happen sometimes, and there's some solutions that hopefully we can get into. A few of them are listed here that can help solve problems. They don't fix them, but they help lessen, so let's make them less visible or less audible to the audience. And so sometimes that's an equalizer, or sometimes it's a noise reduction, so what they call plugins that allow you to manipulate the sound. Sometimes, music can be used to help kind of bring listeners in when say the recording is a little quiet. You can kind of use to create a little more atmosphere, or let's say you have I'll leave it at that. And then also, sometimes a thing that I see common that can be really effective when you're doing podcasts is, if you have bad audio but it's all you have, you can write around that in your narration, in your podcast. You can say, like, look, we got a really quick, he was the circumstances weren't ideal to record him, but what he said is really important. And you play the audio and you can say, let's rewind that and listen again. And, and really emphasize that, okay, yeah, it's bad audio, but it's really important here, so pay attention. And so you can see ways that people can kind of work with mistakes and acknowledge them. I think the mistake you hear a lot of people try and do is pretend that it sounds normal. And that's where people are like, no, I actually can't understand what this person's saying because the recording is so bad. So we're going to get a little into editing and mixing concepts. And that's our next step here. There's this word you see when you hear people talk about audio. It's called DAWs. It means digital audio workstations. It's just a fancy word for something, software that we use. There are several that are listed. They're very popular ones. There are others that there are many that exist these days, but some popular ones here are listed. So you see people using Ableton Live. I use Pro Tools is what I tend to work with. Audacity is a free one people use. We're doing simple audio editing. I think I forgot to put on here, and remembering now, there's GarageBand on Mac. Adobe Audition is one that I know, I think Anna was mentioning she uses. Hindenburg is another one, Logic, Reaper. There are all these different examples. And what I'll do, I think just to avoid us keep going back and forth between sharing screens, it's kind of a complicated process. So maybe I'll come back to that in a few minutes, but we'll move on. But the point is that, that I'd really emphasize is that, they're all in some ways similar. Like each one has their own quirks about how they operate. They have what they call shortcuts. They're keyboard shortcuts that can make it confusing to switch back and forth between them. But in fact, the functions are all very, very similar. And some may be stronger at one thing than another, but by and large, you can probably make, and mix a podcast or music with any one of those and do a decent job. Some, again, may be more convenient to you, or maybe you get used to them. So for example, I've been using this one program for years, and I'm just quicker on it. So I keep using it, but there are other ones that are available that do the same thing. And what are some of the main functions that we see that is common to all of them? It's multi-track mixing. So when you see, several like channels with different audio on it, it's what they call non-destructive editing. So the idea is that if we cut something, we're cutting a representation of it, but you can always undo it. So you're never damaging what you've made. So it's like playing with like clay. You can stretch it in, stretch it out. You can do whatever you like with it. You have control over volume. You can manipulate these waveforms. And essentially what we're doing though is we're mixing all these different tracks to make our own music. It's maybe not music in the traditional sense. We're making a podcast or a radio program, but we're essentially combining these different elements in ways that they intermingle and create an atmosphere. And that's our music in this case as podcasters. So what would that mean? That would be various types of recordings. So when I'm making an audio documentary or a podcast or even a radio program, kind of a journalist report, I'm using these different elements. We talked about field recordings, so when I was out in, I mentioned this trip that I went out with this small microphone to the Shias, this is in the north of Russia, and I did field recordings. So I interviewed people using this small recorder. I recorded the sounds of the camp where everyone was staying. I recorded the campfires as people would sing songs. I recorded the sounds of people cooking food over, they had a kitchen area that people were using to feed, kind of a small army of volunteers who'd come to protest against this place where they want to build a mass sewage dump. So, that's an example of field recordings. But when I came back, I also, wrote up a script, and I have my own narration. So I'm doing that inside the studio, although you see also, occasions where someone might do what we traditionally would call a stand-up. You might record yourself in the field talking and combine that. We see often, particularly, we were just talking about this, how during the pandemic, remote recordings using Skype, telephone, social media accounts like Facebook or Telegram, et cetera, those have all been part of my work. Maybe your story or the story you're trying to tell has archival material. So maybe there's some old recordings you want to find and use. Music, which we'll get to. And I know there were some questions about that on Monday. We'll talk about how you want to approach using music, where you can find music you can use, and how to best work with it. We might look at sound effects, particularly as you're doing a show. You might want to use sound effects to kind of create breaks. It's kind of a common thing that people do. And particularly, I just added this imagined audio spaces. That's sometimes when people might be doing audio drama. And we see podcasts where people are doing essentially theater for the ears. And In that case, you may be combining all these things with actors and with real sounds and imagined sounds, and trying to create essentially this world for your ears. And then I had this one at the last one on this list here is room tone. This is something that is really important and is often forgotten. It's when you're recording an interview with someone, it's really helpful to have record separately just the sound of the room. And you might think that if you're in a quiet space that it sounds like nothing, but that's not true. There's always a little bit of a tone to a room. And when we're actually putting these sounds together, it's really helpful to be able to edit when you have the sound of the room to mix with your interview. It's the difference between creating something where, if it just cuts out into nothing, it sounds like nothing. And it's a chance to create a space and put your interviewee and yourself inside a kind of an audio space, even if it sounds almost silent. In fact, it's not. And if that doesn't make sense, I can hopefully explain that in more detail later. I think this touches on some of what we were talking about before about these kind of virus COVID era computer tools that can be really convenient. We mentioned Skype and Zoom and all this stuff. Wiretap Studio, that's the other program I was saying I use as often as a backup. So I'll use Wiretap to record a telephone call or a call on Facebook or a call on Telegram. So that's an example. And then I mentioned here audio converters, just because sometimes we see you might have, if you download, for example, in WhatsApp, the audio files can sometimes be a little strange for some audio platforms to then interpret. So sometimes you may have to convert a file from, say, MP2 to MP3 to get your computer to read it and register the sound. So there are ways to do that, and it's just some tools that are worth keeping in mind. And this gets to your question from one of the audience here about recording the highest quality possible. So, we can mix when we put sounds online for a podcast. Usually it's an MP3, but ideally what we've done is created the best quality sounding mix and gathered the best quality sounds with our interviews, and then mixed it down into a WAV file, and then reduced that WAV file into something small that the internet can handle and stream on a phone. So you want to it's better to always go from a better quality and mix down to a less good quality rather than trying to go the other direction. This will make more sense later, but we're just plugins. If you get into these DAWs, these digital audio workstations, you see a lot of different tools. In fact, there are millions of them, and they can be overwhelming, frankly. But there are some ones that can be quite helpful too, if used carefully, as you're making your programs. And that's one, and just a couple main ones here that I find are probably the most go-to for me. So that's reverb. That's when you have kind of a big echo. Might be something to create a sense of space. Compression if used gently, can help kind of elevate your voice as you're doing narration, or kind of just enrich the sound. Sometimes with really quiet recordings, you see people use either volumizer or normalizer. Those are two that essentially bump up the size of the recording, make it a little louder. But I should add, also increase the sound. Some of the noise of that audio recording can also go up, so you have to do it carefully. Equalizer is another one, noise reduction. These are just tools that can be very helpful, and maybe we can go into that when we look at some of these digital audio workstations and how they actually appear. So let me just, all right, I think I am now going to stop the share and go to, see if I can do this. I wanted to show you, unfortunately, as I mentioned, these we're unable to actually play sound through Zoom, but I wanted to just show you a few of these different digital audio workstations and what they look like. So, for example, I mentioned Pro Tools. This is the one that I use. Not that I recommend it to people necessarily. It's a little more expensive than it should be, I think. But But for a while, it was considered the industry standard. I don't think that's true anymore. In fact, I know it's not. But I just want to show you how some of these things look very similar. So this is from a session, where I have here I've got, this is CM narration. That's me narrating. So these are my tracks. I have music down here at the bottom. I've got little clips from my interviews, and basically I'm just making a little collage, and trying to put those things together in ways that will sound good to me. And while I'm doing that, I should add, it's not just, you're also playing with levels. So you can switch from, when I talk about the graphic representation of sounds, you can see this, right? This is a sound from an interview, and this wave you're seeing, and they call them waves. That's the interview. And unfortunately, I'll play it. I don't think you can hear it. You may be able to hear it really quietly through my earphones, but I doubt it. Let's try it. So anyway, I don't think you can hear that well.
It's very quiet.
Yeah, so I won't linger on it. But the point is, what you're seeing is a graphic representation of the sound. Like that is what we're seeing is this Adam Hochschild, the interviewee, the guy talking. And we can cut those clips as we like. So when we talk about non-destructive audio, what I mean by that is we can go like this. We can move things in. We can move them back out. We can do whatever we want. We also have, I'll make this a little bigger so a little more apparent. We can also play with volume. So for example, again, we won't be able to hear it, but we can draw it. This would make his voice would be start up here, be loud, and then it would suddenly go down. So that might be not, might use that less for an interview, but it can be really helpful when we're playing with music. So, you take your music track and you can, make it quieter as your interview speaks, and bring it back up. And so you're just creating like a little collage between, depending on what kind of program you want to do, between maybe it's your narration, you're the storyteller, you're talking to somebody, you've got music, you've got some sound effects, and you're just creating your own kind of little mix that you like. I just want to show you some of these other programs that I mentioned. Another one is Hindenburg. So this is one, it's kind of designed to be a bit easier than Pro Tools. So for example, they take care of some of these decisions for you. Like right away, just the default setting as you open this up, you can see speak, interview, ambience, music, right? So they're almost, basically, they're almost planning for you to be a podcaster who says, okay, here, I'm going to put myself here at the top talking. I'm going to bring my interview here, the ambience here. So this might be like, the sound of the street, cars going by, and then music. And then you can kind of paste these things together and play with the volumes and create your own mix, your own little audio pictures. Another one, which is, as Anna noted before we got started, she said it looks scary, and she's right. It's called Reaper. But the thing is, it's so Hindenburg, I think the license on that is, I can't remember exactly, but I want to say it's under $100 or around $100. Pro Tools is more expensive. It's something around $400. So again, I don't necessarily recommend that. But Reaper, for those who are interested in trying to learn more about it, is a kind of an what do they call it? An honesty program. It's free. Well, it's paid, but what it allows you to do. Let's see if I can do this. Here's a perfect example. So I downloaded Reaper. The demo version is complete. There's no limitations to it. And every time you open it up, it just says, would you like to buy it? And you say, actually, I'm still evaluating that. So let's do that. And so, so Reaper. And so again, here's Reaper. It's got way more buttons on here. It's a little confusing, but it's a really powerful tool if you take the time to learn it. But what I'd stress though is that, here, if I add another track, let's see, insert new track. I don't know how to do this. Can I go between those? So if I go like this. Basically, the point I want to make is that all these things are kind of the same. I mean, you can, if I want to import audio to this one, and I have to learn the different shortcuts because these are all different. So it gets a little confusing for me. But this is Hindenburg, and this is an interview I did the other day. And again, it's just a wave representation of a 15-minute conversation. So it's a graphic representation of a 15-minute interview I had with a guy. Normally, if I was just working to do a podcast, I can cut it. You can cut portions of it. So I think it's the B is the function on this one. No, S. Anyway, all these the point is that they all have different ways of editing, but they all do the same thing. They're just different command functions that allow you to do it. And the one that I'm most capable on is, again, this Pro Tools, which allows me to do what I like to do. But I think if you spend enough time on any one of them, you can get pretty proficient pretty quickly. And again, there are many others that there's Logic, there's Adobe Audition is popular with a lot of people, and several others. Another free one I'll mention since we're here is, let's see, can I do this? Let's go. Audacity is this another free program. And might be a nice one to break it. It can be a little clumsy to play with, but might be nice just to get used to playing with audio. So this is Audacity, and it's free, unless you try and get to it from Russia, apparently. I am human. There we go. Anyway, you guys get the point. So let's focus on that. Let's see. I wanted to, so if I want to just again, if we're looking at, let's take a second just to talk a little bit more about these sessions, even though we can't hear them. Let me get rid of this. So let's take this one, for example. If you look at all the different tracks here, you've got, this one's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tracks. Some of the more complicated mixes will have 16 tracks, 20 tracks. It's unlimited. So you may find that for many podcasts, probably 3 or 4, 5 might be about all you need, maybe more than you need. But you can kind of make it endless. And so it allows for you to layer sounds and create sounds as you like. So since I think we can hear internet audio, audio coming from my computer directly, let me just play you examples where you can really, really layer sounds. This is let's see, does this work? Let's see. Okay. So this is an example where you hear these sounds just layered. There's, I don't know, might have been 20 tracks, something like this. And this is a story. It's just, I'll just play a little clip. Listen more for the sound than maybe the context, unless you speak English. But this is about a filmmaker. It was a profile of a filmmaker named Alan Berliner, who has this kind of mania. He collects everything, and his life is like a museum. So everything that every scrap of paper, every memory he has, he kind of stores, and he uses this in his films. And so he's got a very obsessive kind of personality. And I was trying to create that sense of obsession. And so this is I'll just play just a little bit of this, and you can get a sense of what I mean, hopefully.
Well, my name is Alan Berliner, and I live in New York City when I'm not traveling around visiting places.
Meyns. Yeah, Meyns.
How to describe myself? I learned a long time ago that I was someone who liked to put things together. I have what my uncle describes as the saving gene, which he says I inherited from his father, my grandfather.
Why there are wars, why there's fighting, why there's arguing.
My grandfather, when I was a little kid, traveled a lot for his job, and he used to bring me the stamps from the correspondence that they used to get every day. And so So every week he'd give me this manila envelope that would have the stamps ripped off from the corner of the envelope. And they'd be from all over the world. These incredible colors and iconography and world leaders and flowers. And I used to then take the pieces of the envelopes and immerse them in water. Stamps would come unglued from the paper. I had envelopes by country, and I would dry the stamps out, look at them and sort them, and I'm remembering them, and I'm labeling them, and I'm describing them, and I'm cataloging them, categorizing I wanted to, how I was my own little world, sort them every week. I wanted more, and I was labeling them, cataloging them. We do now. It's the same thing. Everything is there because it might be needed one day.
Okay, so, and that's just, like a small example, but there are all these layers of sound in there. So it's really it's one interview to begin with, and then there are layers from his film, there's music, there are effects in there, and there's a moment towards the end where you can hear like the interview he's overlapping on himself. And that's because all these little bits of audio, I've pasted them very close to one another. So they're kind of creating this mania. So that's just one example though, where you can really, it's not just it's not always just, my voice, my interview's voice back and forth. You can do a lot of layering and get creative with it, which is a lot of fun. Takes a lot of time, but it's really fun to do. Let me see. Are we still on the share? Which one are we? I need to go back.
We see the wallpaper, your wallpaper.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's since we're here, why don't we where do we go? So if I go, see if I can get this, stop the screen share. Let's go back to the presentation here. Hi everybody again. Let's go back to here, share screen, and let's do this one again. No, let's do this one. So it's gonna work. Okay, yeah, so let's talk a little bit about music. I know there's some questions from Monday. And let's just start by saying just some kind of general rules as people are working with music. First of all, copyright is a real pain with this stuff, as we even found out from our session on Monday. We played just a little bit of a show that had some copyrighted music, just in trying to praise this as a good podcast, and it still was flagged because these algorithms by the tech companies are so careful and sensitive about this. So anyway, as we're working on podcasts, I think there's some things to keep in mind as you're trying to think about working with music. You're trying to, of course, mesh it with the concept of your podcast. So, you might think about what kind of sounds or what music would be representational of what you want to do, but maybe you can also play against stereotype, so maybe, you can think of like a tech podcast having very techno style music. Maybe you go the other direction. I don't know. You can explore various moods with podcasts. So I think a lot of times when I'm trying to put together a show or a documentary, I'm looking for sounds that can bring out emotions when layered with your interviews. So you might think about different moods that you're trying to evoke and what music makes you feel that way. Another thing that's important, I think music with words is problematic. So instrumental music tends to be better unless somehow the words to the music really fit with what you're trying to do. It gets really difficult when you're talking about one thing and there's a songwriter who's got something very different on his mind. And people, and I just sometimes you'll see people who want to put a song in their show just because they like that song. Well, you can do that, but I think that if you're really trying to kind of craft a show or a feel for what you're trying to do, then you might want to think about keeping words out of it. I think sometimes you can it can be a little bit cliche, and I would be careful of certain cliches. So, if you're doing a documentary about Africa and suddenly they're like bongo drums and, things like that. I mean, it's so predictable that sometimes it can be kind of like, I would probably stay clear of that. Identifiable songs are also bad because people bring their own associations to music. So if it's a really popular song, not only do you have problems with copyright, but even if you didn't, people hear it and they don't think about what you're trying to present to them. They're thinking about, oh, this is a great song I heard at the club when I was out with my friends, or it was a favorite song when I was 16 and I was super depressed and miserable, and et cetera. So keep those things in mind. I wanted to talk about some of the music resources that are available, and I'll go into specifics in a second, but just generally speaking, you have, assuming again, most music is copyrighted, so you want to think about solutions that get you out of that problem. One of them is what's called Creative Commons licensing. So these are songs that are being posted by people who want you to use their music. They want credit. Sometimes they want a little money, but usually not. So you'll see, it'll what's called fair licensing. So you will use it and you just give a credit at the end of your show, and that's they're enjoying the promotion of being part of your show. And there are certain platforms that give you access to Creative Commons licensed music. They're basically collections of Creative Commons music. I think as much as that can be very helpful, it's certainly not the only solution. I think a lot of people tend to work through friends. I mean, if I was making a podcast today, and this is what I did with our last podcast we made, I reached out to friends who are musicians, I had people that made songs. Either I used songs that they had made, or had them commissioned work for them to do. So I had them create stuff that fit the mood that I was looking for. But you also see a lot of people working with, when I say indie musicians, I mean like in independent musicians who are not famous. They might be local bands who would be more than happy to share their music on your podcast, just for a little bit of promotion. So you say, music on our show this week is by this group or that group, and you can just really give them a little bit of a boon. And maybe it's be sure and check out their website, or they're going to play at this club when and if the virus ever ends. And so there might be something like that. Now, there are also what I call licensing shops. These are websites where you can pay a reasonable amount of money to get access to a library. Blue Dot Sessions is one, and I'm going to show you a couple others in a second. We go back to the internet. But the point is that what these do is these are professionally crafted songs designed for podcasts and for scoring for music. And they allow you, it may be expensive. I would say it's probably expensive for an independent podcaster, but if I was a newspaper putting out podcasts, I would consider that, because it gives you enormous access to a lot of options that can be very helpful in making quick decisions, because you can spend a lot of time trying to find music that works for your podcast. And then finally, I just put on this DIY, which is do it yourself. There are ways, and we'll explore some of them, where you can actually make your own music, even if you're not a musician. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. Another thing, and we'll jump out of the presentation here in a second to show you specific examples. But when we talk about sound effects or ambience or background noise, there's some also things you can use. Free Sound is a website that's I use a lot when I'm in a pinch. It's essentially hobbyists who post sounds from all over the world. So I was just looking on there, and I'll show you in a second. I was looking on there, and I punched in Kyiv, and there was sounds of the underground, of parks, of church service. All this stuff can be very useful, and once you register, it's free to download, and you can just credit the people if you want at the end of your show. In fact, I think you're not even required to, but it's nice to do. Another thing, the BBC has a huge sound effects archive that can be useful not for, say, documentaries, but maybe you could have fun with it. So they might have like the sound of horses galloping around a horse track, or like from a horse race, and you could use this as kind of a goofy, silly way to kind of make transitions. So it's up to you to as creative as you want to be. YouTube is another one. Of course, a lot of people post a lot of material on YouTube. So sometimes you can grab sounds from there and they're plugins you can put onto your say Chrome or any of the browsers that you use that allow you to download directly from YouTube. Or again, maybe if it was having problems, you could also use something like a wiretap program to just record the sounds on your computer and work with that. And then, of course, you can also record your own. So if you have, say, this Zoom recorder or your phone, you can record sounds, whether it's the sound of a door creaking, and use these kind of sound effects into your program. And these are all things that are absolutely fair game to do. So let me pop out of the presentation for a second, and Anna, you'll have to remind me if I'm still on. What do I have to do to get back to? Let me get this figured out. I want to. Here we go. Okay, so if I stop share, and I go back and I screen share the entire desktop. There we go. So let me do this. I wanted to show you all a few. See if I can do this, I think. Okay, so just a couple things here. You can all see that, right? Anna, just give me a nod.
Yep.
Yeah, okay,
yep,
cool.
We could see.
Okay, yeah, great. So here, when I talk about these license shops, these are companies that have created, they've looked at the podcast medium and they said they see a business opportunity. So rather than, you hear these horror stories about how you want to use someone's music and they say, oh, I want, $20,000 for you to use my song. We don't have the $20,000. We're not going to do that. But some of these shops will allow you to license collections. So Epidemic Sound, they have, where they have personal, so you get a personal account, and they've got, essentially tons of music designed for people to use if they want to make podcasts or videos and avoid licensing problems. Blue Dot Sessions is a really popular one, and I think I can play you some clips on this one if I'm not mistaken. Let's try this. So anyway, the point is you can see it. They have filtered by mood, density, energy, gravity. I mean, some of this stuff is a little silly, but it's gravity. They mean sort of how dramatic the sound is. And so if you were, I don't know if I would do this if I was just making my own podcast on my own, if I would pay all the money for it, but I have friends who are making podcasts here who just found it easier to register with Blue Dot and get access to this enormous library of really highly good quality music they can use to illustrate their podcast and not have to worry about constantly finding sounds. Free Sound is this website I mentioned. So here, this is what it looks like. So you can, it's got a search engine. So I think I went to Kyiv. And here you have just like, I think the one I liked was what was it? City Park. This one was nice. So I don't know how many are in Kyiv right now, and if you can hear those same birds and crows making sounds, singing. But anyway, that's an example. And they have, of course, like the as I mentioned, there's train doors. All sorts of things. And so, or maybe it's, can also use it for sound effects. I think I was using one the other day. I was looking for a click from a record. So a vinyl click, they have things like vinyl crackle. Okay, this one sounds similar, he says. Actually, I don't think it does. Anyway, you get the idea. So sometimes this can be a really helpful tool as you're looking for sounds. And let me just get out of this one. So those are just a few examples. Let me go back to history here. What else we have open? That later. Just make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, here's another one I thought was really interesting. So YouTube now has this audio library, this massive audio library of Creative Commons free music. So let's see if it loads. It might take a second. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So again, it's hit and miss with what you're looking for, but you see the track title, genre, mood, artist. So you can filter. So if I wanted to say mood, what I say, angry, calm. Let's say calm or dramatic. What do you got? Which one do you want? Let's say calm. So see how that works, and see what happens. Okay, so now we have all these calm tracks. Let's see how calm they really are. Oh, that is calm. So and you can see the download here at the end. And then also sound effects. Let's see what they have. I don't know what they have for here. Okay, so kids playing. Yeah, so it's kind of like free sound. So we'll see what it sounds like. Yeah, so like legit field recordings from people. Anyway, that might be a good tool. If you're looking for sounds and free music, it might be something to consider. What else did I have? Did I mention something else? I think we're going to talk about, in a second, I want to talk about some of these. So here we go. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about generative music. Now, I mentioned this idea of essentially, not being a musician, but still making sounds and how that might work. There are all sorts of programs, particularly for the smartphones and for iPads, that would allow you to create sounds. And so I have them on my phone. I'm trying to think, maybe I can pull up just a couple examples here with, let's see if I can do this. Brian Eno Bloom. I don't know how many of you know the musician Brian Eno, but he was a producer. Well, he does sort of experimental soundscapes and worked with David Bowie in the 70s and is quite famous among certain circles. And he's also always been kind of on the cutting edge of musical concepts. And so he had this idea of generative music, this idea that music that kind of made itself. And so he created a program called Bloom. And I don't know if I can. Okay, well, anyway, this gives you an idea of what it looks like. I can maybe play just a little bit of it. But the idea is it's a touch interface. So, I don't know, it may cost $7 or something, but you basically, by touching your phone, you create notes. And I can play a little bit in my headset here just to see if this gives you a sense of how this works. Although you won't be able to see it, but it's okay. So here you go. So I'm going to turn my phone up here. Get it out. My cat just woke up because of this sound. So it's really, it's very meditative, of course. But there are other examples where, for example, there's another one called Cycle. Let's see if I can do this one. Cycle, generative music. Generative music. Okay, I guess there's a bunch of them. Here, maybe those will just have pictures we can use. Or is that not going to work? I don't know. But so Cycle has... a lot of them are. A lot of it's the same concept where you're using like an interface to make sounds. An example one I thought was kind of funny was one called Blocks Wave, and this one I'll play a little bit. You can have like all I'm doing is hitting a button, and you can manipulate the sounds. some of them, okay, you might hear some and think that I'll never use that, but some are kind of hypnotic and might be interesting to play with.
Charles,
So
I suggest we speed up a little bit.
Okay. All right. Give me 1 second to stop that noise. Anyway, so there are a bunch of examples, and I've listed some here, but let's move on. Where, again, you can make your own sounds. And let's go next to, so this. And then we're coming actually to the end here, so it's fine. The other thing I really wanted to mention was, because podcasting has become so popular, you now have the advent of what are called all-in-one kits. They try and simplify everything so you can create your own podcast without having any equipment at all. You just need a computer and the internet. I don't know if I would say that these are most, ideal for trying to do a really complicated podcast, but there are some really interesting ideas out there. And so I want to show you a few of them. See if this loads up. Gonna work. So this one, let's see. Okay, let's try this. Well, here, I'll just show you one. So Anchor. Yeah. There are several of them, and I've listed them, but let's look at this one's actually free. Most of them are trying to make money. So they want you to subscribe, and then they offer you some options. But this one, for example, I just signed up for this, and I'm kind of learning my way through it. But what it allows you to do is create, you can upload a picture, creates an icon for you to use. Say you want to create a new episode. You can record audio right from your browser. So let's see if it works. I don't know if it'll work with our thing. Let's see if let's try this. So I say, hello, this is a podcast about podcasting in Ukraine. Then it uploads, hopefully. Processing. Oh, there we go. Hello, this is a podcast about podcasting in Ukraine. So there we go. Now you have the library. Oh, excuse me. Then you have transitions. And let's say you like this one. So let's go. We start with this one. There's a library. Messages. Okay. Okay, so let's add this one. Then we have our transition. Add this. And then we save episode. So it's a really short podcast we're making today. We can call it episode one, Ukraine. And we save it as a draft. Nothing much. And publish date. Customize it. We can play with the artwork.
I like your artwork.
Oh yeah. This is the icon that I've been using for a while, so I just put that one on there. Then we say save as a draft. And can we hear it or not update it yet? Let's see. Oh, here we go. So it's going to play. It's like, can't be heard by anybody but you, but that's okay. Oh, here we go. Hello, this is a podcast about podcasting in Ukraine. Pretty exciting, huh? So anyway, I don't think it's necessarily like the greatest solution if you were trying to create a show, but it might be a fun way to sketch out some ideas. Or if you get really good at it, maybe it would work for you. I saw that it has also features for example, also having people add voice messages. So this might be a nice way to work with interactive stuff. I should note this was bought up by Spotify, just to give you a sense of how much interest there is in these technologies. And Spotify also is behind this other one, which I was noting in this. this other one called Soundtrap for Storytellers is another example. They bought that one as well. That's theirs. Alutu is another one very similar to Anchor, except that they want money. So I don't think it's necessarily worth it. Anyway, so maybe I'll pause there, and if people want to ask questions, we can move on.
There are actually quite a lot of questions. So maybe if you want to sum up, if you have some final slides, I suggest you do them now, and then we'll just have the questions in the very end.
Sure. So, just to kind of finish up here, I just was thinking about, workflow, because, when I'm trying to make something, let's see, is that going to work? Yeah. Okay. So when I'm just thinking about, the workflow, first of all, you have an idea, of course, and I know you've all come with your ideas or interest in the possibility of doing a podcast. And so you might think about, the kind of recordings you're going to make. So I think with the pandemic right now, I think we're kind of limited in that sense, but normally you might say, am I going to need to go out in the field and talk to people? Am I going to invite them into our office to talk with us around a table? Is it going to be just, journalists talking amongst themselves? I mean, it could be anything. But you just think about some of the way you want to approach your podcast and some of the resources you'll need. And with that comes these questions about gear. What programs do you need? Maybe you don't need to go out in the field, but you just need a nice studio setup with a decent microphone, a computer, and a quiet space, and you can invite people in for conversations about whatever issue is interest to you, or tell the stories you want to tell. You might think about some of the music that might fit with what you're doing, who map out in your own head, who are friends who might be able to contribute to that. So I was talking about a podcast we did last year called Space Bridge, which is about the 80s. And so what I did is I reached out to friends who are really interested in old kind of synthesizers, and they created kind of fun synth music for me that we used in a lot of the podcast to give that kind of sense of the 80s. That was kind of a part of what we wanted to do. Going ahead, oops. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Go the other way. And then I think, when I get these, when I actually do interviews, and this is maybe coming more as kind of someone from the audio documentary world, I try and look for the best moments, usually the moments that I find entertaining, that either make me laugh or they're sad. A lot of the best audio tends to be wrapped in emotion of some kind. When we're actually cleaning up our interviews, and this is something I'd hoped we could do, but unfortunately without sound on these audio editing workstations, it's very difficult. But you're cleaning up, you have an interview, and someone might pause or go, and these kind of little things, these kind of sort of extras that we don't need, they take up a lot of time. You can clean a lot of that stuff up by editing audio very easily in ways that you can't do with video. So I would just add that when we do that, it's not like, I think a lot of FM radio in particular tends to try and cram as much information in as quickly as possible. Podcasting tends to have a more natural sound. So you're trying to make cuts in the audio to make things sound natural. And that includes letting people breathe. So, if someone takes a big breath, you leave that in, then they pick up. So there's an approach to cleaning up tape and editing up your interviews to make things sound good. And so I'll spend quite a bit of time cleaning up the interviews to particularly of the moments that really, speak to me. And then I think we're coming to the end here. Yeah, and when I'm sort of finally, I've got my recordings, I listen to the bits I like, I transcribe them, I put together a script, and once I'm ready, I can start dumping things into these audio workstations, these digital audio workstations, and start playing with ideas. Sometimes the ideas in advance what you're looking to do, but you can also look at these things at these digital audio platforms as ways to experiment. You can play around with ideas. And also it's a nice way to audition music. You have your interview, you have your voice, and you might just import several different tracks of music that you think might fit for it, and actually listen to how it sounds. And if it makes you feel like it's capturing the ideas and sounds that you're hoping it will. And then I start to play with the mix. It's can take a long time on more complicated ones. On simpler ones, it's not so hard. But these things are all really just creating these kind of audio pictures that now we call podcasts or radio programs or radio documentaries. And it's a fun way to spend an afternoon. And I wish we could do more in terms of trying to think if there's, maybe if we get to the questions, but, I think if there's a way, maybe we can figure out a way to at least visually show you how some of these cuts are done to clean up interviews. Maybe that would be helpful, but let me pause for that and take questions. Then we can see where we are.
Great. Thank you, Charles. We actually don't have a lot of time for questions.
Sorry.
I would just get you like a very general one. So the audience is asking, what is like a lethal mistake, or mistakes that young, unexperienced podcasters do in the beginning? So maybe you you already mentioned it, but maybe you can repeat it again and be like, hey guys, don't do this, don't do this, and don't do this, and then you'll be fine.
Okay, let me go skip here. Yeah, I would say, and the simplest thing you can do, wear headphones. Just when you're recording, if you're actually listening to what you're recording, you can avoid a lot of mistakes. That's a really simple one. If you are recording people in the field, again, you're listening with headphones. It allows you to find the best distance for the microphone. It can depend on how loud the person is. You can also set the audio levels on these things. So it has like a little dial here. So, usually something about 7 is good. And as you're listening, you're just trying to make sure you're getting like the best quality recording that you can. And I just think like the more you're listening, the more you're gonna find out, oh my God, this refrigerator is buzzing in the background, or something else is going on that's going to ruin this recording. So that's the simplest thing you can do. I can't think what other ones. I think also another kind of simple rule, but it probably applies to everything in life. It's better if you test things out before you go. If you're trying to get this really important interview with someone or talk to someone it's a really important recording for you, it's best not to do it with something with equipment you haven't tried before. So it's best to kind of demo out, make sure you understand how things turn on, off, just make sure everything's working before you go out, because it's really frustrating when you get someplace and of course your gear doesn't work or there's problems that you didn't anticipate. It happens, but the more you can check stuff in advance, that's a really easy one that can really help.
Thanks. Another question we got, and to me, that sounds really something that worries me as well. How do you use, natural sounds? A lot of people who do podcasts are kind of obsessed with having this really clean sound. So if something falls down when you're speaking or there's some noise, they just want to clean it. But sometimes it's good, to have those noises. So what is the technical suggestion here, but also, just aesthetically, what's best?
Yeah, I think we were talking on Monday a little bit about how, it's nice to have like a quiet studio. That's ideal if you have a quiet room in your house or your apartment, or if it's your office space where you can record. Again, pillows, soft furniture can avoiding a big echoey room is can help a lot. But I think in some ways, recordings where people are wandering in and out can be really kind of fun too. It's just it's a different feel to it, of course, but it can be very funny. And like right now, if I turn I was telling Anna about this cat. We have this cat Gosha here, and she's been quiet the whole time, but I kind of wondered if she wasn't going to sort of pop into the screen and, and start bothering us and making noise. So, I think there's a certain charm to that, and I wouldn't necessarily disavow it.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think the final question would be, I have my episode ready. I want to publish it. Should I go with Anchor? Should I go with SoundCloud? Should I publish it on my media platform right away? Or should I do it both?
Yeah, you see people looking across all platforms. So some of the big ones you mentioned, SoundCloud, iTunes library is kind of like the Library of Congress now for podcasts. It seems to have everything. So I think the more platforms that you can put yourself on, it's better. If 10 years ago, it seemed like iTunes was the only game in town for where you could find podcasts. Now there's several places. Spotify is a huge player now, and they've invested a ton of money into podcasting, and they're only going to grow. And as you saw with some of these platforms, for example, the Storyteller platform that and this other one we were demoing, those allow you to sync yourself right into the Spotify catalog. So all these things can let you essentially get your work out there and make it easier to post them up.
Okay, I think your cat agrees.
Oh, she did too. Yeah, gosh, I made a sound.
Thank you, Charles. Thanks a lot for your webinar. It was extremely useful. You promised during the webinar that you're going to give me the list of all of the useful tools. So, I'm just reminding you, so you send me those and the people are listening. So this is on record. Perfect. Thanks a lot for this webinar. For those of you who are super interested in podcasts, everybody watching us, we have good news because actually next week we're continuing with podcasts. So we're not going away with this topic. We're just going to be covering different elements, different aspects of this. So we'll be talking about storytelling and we will be talking about monetization. So basically, once you have all of these amazing tools that Charles mentioned, once you tried recording, once you've played with the sounds and you have the finished podcast, what do you do with it? How do you make money out of it? And how are you able to continue, creating podcasts one after another? So it's not just a one-time thing. So register for our next webinars. We will have a Ukrainian podcaster, Kirill Bezkoroviny. You can register through our website, MediaBoost.live. All of the schedule is there. So just register, subscribe, and we'll see you on Monday and Wednesday next week. With Charles, we'll get a lot of resources from him because he promised.
Yes.
We will also get everybody, all of you guys who have registered through our website and also everybody who registered to Zoom. You'll also get the recording of this webinar so you can watch it whenever you want, just to kind of, relive all of these moments. If you don't remember the names of some of the programs, they will be there in the recording. So,
and if I could just add for a second, I think what I'll do is give a list of some of the links to some platforms I mentioned today, as well as external links that might just be helpful for additional information, good resources for podcasts and about recording and making podcasts, and also just. It's been kind of fascinating over the last, several years, certainly in the US. You've seen these production houses. These are essentially production houses that make podcasts they've become a real part of the podcast economy. So they maybe make their own shows and they monetize them through advertising, but they also do sponsored content. So they work with brands and companies to make stories and really high quality stories for audio. So you're seeing this whole manufactured environment now around audio and storytelling, and certainly, and I'm starting to see it in Russia as well. So it's really fascinating to see it kind of take off here in Moscow. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is just around the corner for people. And I think it's also just, I would emphasize that, as much as we're talking about how to make things on your own, one of the joys of podcasting is actually working with other people. So, if you work with friends who are musicians or people who know how to make sounds, if you don't know how to work with sound, it can make your life a lot easier because you can focus on the storytelling or the content while someone can help you make the mix. And so I would encourage you to get to know these resources and get familiar with working with audio, but also work with people who have more experience and learn from them as well.
Great, thanks a lot. I suggest for you, Charles, to stay after the webinar and just read all of the nice things people wrote to you in the chat, because there's a lot of thank you and people really loved it. So thanks a lot. Was super productive, super fruitful. We'll be watching the recordings afterwards. And to all of you guys who stayed with us, thanks a lot for coming. And I will see you next week. Bye.
Bye all. Take care.